Hey people, Australian military leaders say that we must prepare for the worst. As Australia was swept by panic buying and medical shortages this year, the scenes were eerily familiar for one of the country's most senior military planners. Listen to the wording, people. In a secret meeting only a year earlier, the Defence Department's Director of Preparedness, Cheryl Durant, and a group of Australian industry leaders had predicted a strikingly similar scenario. In a secret meeting only a year earlier, that's a year earlier of COVID, the Defence Department's Director of Preparedness, Cheryl Durant, and a group of Australian industry leaders had predicted a strikingly similar scenario. We predicted the unpredictable. Really, they're clairvoyants now? Says Durant, who left the department in January. I wonder why. We knew the problems. We knew this might be coming. We knew that various things needed to be done. Are you hearing this? The ABC has obtained a confidential report prepared for Defence just a year before the COVID-19 outbreak, which provides a forecast of Australia's vulnerabilities in a global crisis. Ms. Durant is speaking out about the predictions. Like I said, we've got clairvoyance now, okay? Nothing was planned. It was just a prediction, and it happened. Ms. Durant is speaking out about the predictions after ending her 30-year defence career because she believes it is her duty to convince Australia to prepare for an increasingly unstable world. I've looked at the global situation, she says. It's no use festering in a bunker somewhere in Canberra. It's a time of crisis. She says the risks to Australia are snowballing with climate change, which is a load of bullshit, US-China tensions, which is a load of bullshit, and the rise of nationalist governments among the key threats to global stability. The report, which Ms. Durant commissioned to plan for the growing threats, lays out a timeline of how Australian essential services would collapse within just 3 months of a crisis worse than the COVID-19 threat, which would put a halt to global trade. If you think of the COVID crisis, as a test run, it's really a critical thing for us to learn from this, she said. The lesson is expect the unexpected. I'm telling you, people, there is something behind this. There is something big behind this. You're being told, expect the unexpected. As the Defence Department's Director of Preparedness and Mobilisation, Ms. Durant planned for horror scenarios that would keep most Australians up at night. Really? Last year, she commissioned a landmark review of defence planning, the first so-called mobilisation review since the Cold War, to prepare for what the department concluded was an increasingly likely global crisis. We saw 3 main possibilities of that happening: the increasing and escalating effects of climate change and natural disasters, because they've got control of all of that, okay? A global power conflict, which I doubt very much, probably between America and China, and finally, a pandemic. A pandemic. One with a much greater death rate than what we're seeing with the COVID crisis, Ms. Durant said. The review looked at the big issues, like if we had to go to war, do we have enough fuel? Do we have enough energy? Can the national supply chains of our national infrastructure support defence in a war or other crisis? To answer her questions, Ms Durant gathered 17 senior engineers from Australia's key industries to wargame whether Australia's supplies could sustain the nation through a prolonged crisis where global supply chains were severely disrupted. This was a year ago. We asked if we had basically a halt on global supply, a couple of steps more demanding than we're seeing in the current crisis. What would run out in 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, or 3 months? We wanted to understand what was the thing we were most vulnerable in. The experts were selected by their industry peak body, Engineers Australia, from sectors including healthcare, electricity, fuel, water, mining, and telecommunications. Out of this thought experiment, what the group looked at across each of their sectors was what would this mean for their particular sector. Engineers Australia CEO Dr. Bronwyn Evans said, they identified that because we're part of the global supply chain, when the ability for that to continue to function broke down, you'd start to get shortages. You'd run out of things in areas, for example, like the water supply, like telecommunications. Is that what's next? The final report by Engineers Australia obtained by the ABC laid out a chilling timeline of how Australia's essential services would break down in an unspecified global crisis. While the group didn't look at a pandemic specifically, of course not, some of the predictions were eerily accurate. Like I said, we got prophets down under, We got fucking clairvoyance, we got prophets, According to the report, the workshop delivered the overarching advice that, in the scenario provided, Australia would suffer massive upheaval within 1 week due to job losses, social unease, and public and industrial hoarding. With at least 90% of Australia's specialist medical supplies imported, the report found specialist medicines may be exhausted within days, with severe repercussions for public health. Within a fortnight, with a restriction of imported medical equipment, healthcare would be degraded. Ms Durant, the report was evidence Australia governments could have been better prepared when the fallout from the pandemic hit the nation's hospital, supermarkets, and Centrelink queues, which is welfare. Our preparedness planning was probably a D+ or a C-, but our response was much better, she said. In order to have that response that is really sharp out of the blocks, we weren't quite there in the first couple of weeks. I was bemoaning the fact that even though we'd done the work and had seen what might happen, we hadn't yet been able to get the buy-in to do the further planning and actually act on that information. Australian industries and governments are now scrambling to prepare in case more supply chains come under threat in the global economic fallout from coronavirus. The pandemic is causing widespread disruptions to shipping and air freight and wreaking havoc on supplies across Europe, America, and Asia. A year ago, people, I'm going to pretty much leave it here. It goes for nearly 20 minutes, this article. That's me just reading it, not even commenting any further on it. I'm going to leave a link in the description so that you can go in there and have a look. And read through it. Look at the wording that they use. Look at the words that they use, okay? Because there's hidden shit everywhere. According to the report, the first casualties after healthcare would be sanitation creating a further risk of disease. It says water treatment and sewage systems could start to fail within a week as crucial imported chemicals run out. We found that, like our medical supplies, most of the chemicals were sourced offshore and we had only a limited supply. The risk of disruptions has been a wake-up call for the industry. It goes on and on and on about what they discussed and water treatment plants and the chemicals for that. You probably take it for granted that you can just go to a Bowser and fill up like it's your lifeline. This is as far as petrol goes, okay, diesel. Like I said, it goes on and on and on and on. Australia is at an interesting fork in the road where it goes on from here. If we take the attitude, she'll be right, go back to business as usual, bounce back, I think we're going to find ourselves not as well prepared for what happens next. I think we're going to find ourselves not as well prepared for what happens next. Like I said, I'll leave a link in the description. You can come read it. And I'll catch you guys on the flip side.